3 years after I watched them lower my son into the ground, I finally drove back to the lake house I had built for him on the shores of Lake Lure. I turned onto the gravel road expecting to find broken shutters, an overgrown yard, and a dock rotting into the water. Instead, I saw the lights on inside, every single one of them. I stopped the truck right there in the middle of the road and sat with my hands on the wheel, staring at a warm, glowing house that should have been dark and empty and grieving like me. Then I remembered the crawl space. I am grateful you are here with me tonight. Before I take you inside that house, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Your company means more to me than you know. The drive from Charlotte to Lake Lure takes about 2 hours on a clear morning. That November Tuesday, with the Blue Ridge sitting gray and cold above the tree line, it felt longer. My financial advisor had been the one to finally push me. "Harold," he said, "the property taxes alone are killing you. You either sell it or rent it. You cannot keep paying for a place you refuse to visit." He was right. 3 years was long enough. I had been avoiding that lake house since the funeral, since the morning 2 deputies knocked on my door and told me my son Daniel had fallen from a trail on Chimney Rock and that there was nothing anyone could have done. Danny had been 34 years old. He had hiked that trail since he was 12. I turned onto the narrow 2-lane that wound along the eastern bank of the lake. Through the pines I could see the house, and what I saw tightened something in my chest before my mind had fully processed it. The dock had been repaired. The wood was new, still pale and unweathered. The lawn had been cut recently, the edges trimmed clean. A black SUV sat in the carport next to a silver sedan I did not recognize. My hands started shaking before I even stopped the engine. Those vehicles should not have been there. I had never rented the house to anyone. I had given no one a key. I stepped out into the cold air and stood still for a moment, listening. From somewhere inside I could hear music playing, something low and easy. The kind of music you put on when you are comfortable and you believe you are completely alone. I almost called the sheriff right then. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but something made me stop. Something made me want to understand first, before I handed this to anyone else. Because I had built that house myself, and I had installed certain things in it that Danny had never known about. I was a retired systems engineer, 40 years of designing security infrastructure for manufacturing facilities across the Carolinas. When I built Danny's lake house 8 years ago, the habit was too deep to break. Behind the water heater, in the crawl space beneath the master bedroom, I had mounted a small network-attached storage unit connected to 6 hidden cameras throughout the house. Danny had teased me about being paranoid when I mentioned a basic alarm system, so I had never mentioned the rest. The crawlspace unit ran on its own circuit, separate from the main panel, pulling barely enough power to notice. It had been recording continuously for 3 years. Whatever had been happening inside that house, I had it all on drive. I did not go to the front door. I walked around the side of the property, staying low under the tree line, until I reached the back corner of the house where the crawlspace access panel sat flush with the foundation. The latch was stiff from cold and disuse. I worked it open slowly. The smell of damp earth and insulation hit me as I squeezed inside and crawled on my hands and knees toward the orange extension cord I had run along the left wall 8 years ago. The unit was still there, still running. The small green indicator light blinked steadily in the dark, like a patient heartbeat. I sat in that crawl space with my back against a support beam and opened the remote viewer on my phone, connecting to the unit's local network. My hands were shaking badly enough that I mistyped the password twice. The interface loaded. Live feeds appeared in a 4-grid layout on my screen, dim and slightly grainy but clear enough. And on the kitchen feed, I saw them. Marcus Webb was standing at my son's kitchen counter, pouring 2 glasses of red wine with the ease of a man who had been doing it for years. He wore a fleece pullover I recognized as one of Danny's. He looked relaxed. He looked at home. Marcus had been Danny's business partner for 6 years, the co-founder of their small civil engineering firm in Asheville. He had sat in the front row at Danny's funeral and wept so hard that I had put my hand on his back. He had called me every few months since then, checking in, asking how I was holding up. Just last spring, he had taken me to lunch and talked for an hour about how much he still missed Danny. Yet here he was, living in Danny's house, using Danny's things, pouring wine like it was an ordinary Tuesday evening. I switched to the living room feed. Simone Carver was sitting on Danny's leather sofa with her feet tucked under her, scrolling through her phone. Simone had been Danny's girlfriend for the last 2 years of his life. She had moved into this house with him 14 months before he died. After the accident, she had been inconsolable, or so she had seemed. I had driven up 3 times in that first month to check on her. She had held my hand and told me Danny had been the love of her life. She looked up when Marcus walked in with the wine. She smiled. He leaned down and kissed her on the top of her head. I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep from making a sound. I pulled up the archived footage and started going back. Days, then weeks, then months. They had been here the entire time, moving in gradually at first. A bag here, a car there, then completely, fully, as though ownership had always been theirs. I watched Marcus carry boxes of his own belongings through the front door. I watched Simone rearrange Danny's bookshelf, pulling his books out and stacking them in a corner. I watched them laughing at the kitchen table, eating dinner, walking out to the dock in the morning with coffee, living. Then I found the conversation from 4 months ago. Marcus was pacing the living room, talking fast, his voice low but agitated. The audio was not perfect, but the unit's microphone was good enough. I heard him say, "We need to get the title moved before his father does anything with the property." Simone had said something in response that I could not fully make out. Marcus again. He thinks Danny died because of a frayed anchor clip. Nobody is ever going to look closer than that. I pressed pause and sat in the dark under my dead son's house with cold mud under my palms and the words replaying in my head. Nobody is ever going to look closer than that. Danny's death had been ruled an accident. A carabiner clip on his safety harness had failed during a technical section of the Hickory Nut Falls Trail. He had fallen 40 feet into the rocks below. The Park Service had investigated and concluded the clip had been compromised by corrosion, consistent with heavy use over many seasons. There had been no reason to suspect anything else. Danny was an experienced hiker, but experienced hikers had accidents. Except Danny replaced his gear every 2 seasons without fail. I had watched him do it. He was meticulous about it. I stayed in that crawl space for 2 more hours, reviewing footage, saving critical clips to my phone's cloud backup. By the time I crawled back out into the November air, my knees were stiff and my jacket was filthy, and I knew with absolute certainty that my son had been murdered. I also knew that if I walked into that house right now, if Marcus heard me, if he suspected what I had found, I would never make it back down that mountain road. He was 20 years younger than me, and he had already done this once. I needed to disappear. I needed to think. I got back in my truck and drove down the mountain without my headlights on until I reached the county road. Then I pulled over and sat in the dark for a long time. My phone had enough battery for 1 call. I dialed Walter Greer. Walt and I had served together in the Army Corps of Engineers in the late 1970s. We had been close ever since, through marriages, kids, careers, the whole long arc of a life. He answered on the second ring the way he always did, like he had been expecting me. "Walt," I said, "I need your help. I need you to listen and not ask questions until I am finished." He listened. When I was done, he said, "Tell me where you are." I found a motel 20 minutes south in Rutherfordton, and Walt wired me enough money to cover a week. No questions. Just a short text that said, "Stay put and stay smart." I sat on the edge of that motel bed and stared at the wall and let myself be still for a while. In the morning, I had one clear objective. The footage I had was damning for what it suggested, but suggestion was not enough. I needed something concrete to connect Marcus and Simone to the harness failure. Something that would hold up and not get dismissed or lawyered away by Marcus's family, who had money enough to complicate things considerably. I spent that first day going back through every archived file, taking notes, building a timeline. I found something I had almost missed. 6 weeks before Danny died, the camera in the garage had recorded Marcus arriving alone at the lake house, while Danny was at a job site in Henderson County. I had the timestamp. Marcus had gone into the gear storage area near the back wall where Danny kept his climbing equipment in labeled bins. He had spent 11 minutes back there. He had left before Danny returned. 11 minutes. Long enough to do what needed doing to a carabiner clip. I also found a recording from 8 days before Danny's death. Simone on the phone, voice tight and sharp in a way I had never heard from her. She said, "It has to be soon. The investor meeting is in 6 weeks, and without Danny's signature off the partnership, Marcus cannot access the account. I know that. I am telling you it has to be soon." She hung up and stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, looking out at the lake. I sat with that audio clip and thought about what I knew of their business arrangement. Danny had mentioned once that the firm's primary investment account required dual authorization, that if one partner died, a probate process could take 6 months or longer before the survivor gained full control, unless the surviving partner had already taken steps to work around that. I needed to understand the financial trail, and I needed someone to help me do it quietly. I drove to Asheville the next morning and found Paul Gentry, the accountant who had handled Danny's personal taxes for 4 years. Paul was a careful, meticulous man in his late 50s who had liked Danny very much. When I sat down across from him and explained what I had found, he went very still. Then he started pulling records. What he found over the next 3 hours made the financial motive clear and damning. In the 14 months since Danny's death, Marcus had moved the firm's primary investment account, restructured the partnership documentation retroactively, and was in the process of a title transfer on the Lake Lure property, which he was pursuing through a probate loophole based on a document purporting to show Danny had verbally agreed to transfer the property to the business as a collateral asset. The document had a notarized signature. Paul looked at it for a long time and then looked at me. "Harold," he said quietly, "I processed Danny's signatures for 4 years. This is not his handwriting." I asked Paul to print everything and keep it locked in his office safe. Then I drove back to Rutherford and sat with what I had. Here's what I understood. I could go to the police. I had footage. I had financial records. I had a forged document. But Marcus had a family attorney who had handled complex civil litigation for 30 years. Simone had no prior record and would almost certainly claim she had been manipulated. With a skilled defense, this could become a years-long process that ended in reduced charges, a plea arrangement, and sentences that fit their crimes the way a loose coat fits a man meant for a smaller one. Maybe 5 years, maybe less. My son had been 34 years old. I needed them to destroy themselves. I needed them to panic so completely and so quickly that they said the things that could not be walked back, the things no lawyer could explain away. I needed them to confess the way people only confess when they believe they are already caught and have nothing left to protect. I called Walt again that evening. I told him what I needed. He said he would drive up the next day. Walt arrived at the motel at noon, and we spent 3 hours at the table by the window going over everything. He had 30 years of experience as a contractor doing facilities security assessment. He understood systems the way I did. When I told him my plan, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are going to give me a heart attack." But he was already writing a list of materials. I had a spare key to the house, hidden under a flat rock beside the back steps. I had always kept one there in case Danny lost his. He had used it twice in 8 years. I knew Marcus did not know it existed because it was not on the key ring Danny kept inside the house. It was just a flat rock beside the steps that had always been there. We drove up to the lake house at 3 in the morning. Marcus's SUV and Simone's sedan were both in the carport, dark and quiet. We let ourselves in through the back door without a sound. Walt went to the crawl space to physically retrieve the NAS unit and copy the drive to an external backup. I went upstairs to the small study off the master bedroom. When I had built this house, I had run Ethernet cable through the walls, from every room to a central hub in that study closet. It was behind a false panel I had installed because I liked having clean walls and no visible conduit. Danny had used the study as a home office, but had never opened that closet panel. There was no reason to. It looked like a section of drywall. I spent 45 minutes in that closet in the dark with a headlamp and a small toolkit, patching into the existing camera feeds and adding a live broadcast capability to 3 of the interior cameras. I routed everything through a dedicated hotspot device Walt had brought. Then I connected the camera in the living room ceiling fan to a second channel that would stream directly to a laptop in Walt's truck at the end of the driveway. I also did one more thing before I left. In the living room, behind the large framed photograph of the lake at sunrise that had hung on the wall since Danny put it there, I placed a small audio transmitter, no larger than a matchbook, 2-way capable. I could speak into it from anywhere within a quarter mile, and the sound would come from directly behind that photograph, at ear level, clear as a voice in the room. We were back out of the house by 4:30 in the morning. Walt drove down the road and parked in a pull-off behind a stand of hemlocks. I sat in the passenger seat, and we waited for the sun to come up. At 8 in the morning, I sent the first message. I had bought a prepaid phone at a gas station the day before. Paid cash. I typed it carefully. The harness clip didn't fail on its own. I watched you go into the gear room, Marcus. 6 weeks before Danny died. I have the footage. Enjoy the wine. I hit send, removed the battery, and counted slowly to 60. I imagine him reading that in the kitchen over his coffee. I imagine the coffee going cold in his hand. I imagine him turning to Simone with his face suddenly wrong and her asking what is the matter and him not answering right away because he was trying to decide if this was real or if this was someone guessing. That uncertainty is its own kind of torment. Doubt is heavier than accusation. I let them carry it for 6 hours. Then I sent the second message, from a different prepaid phone I had prepared. Simone, does Marcus know you called someone 8 days before the accident and said it has to be soon? Because I do. I did not hear what happened inside the house, but I could imagine it well enough. By that evening, the lights inside were moving room to room the way they do when people are pacing, checking windows, checking locks, talking fast and low. I let them have one more night. The following afternoon, I sent the third message, this one to Marcus only. The title transfer won't go through. Paul Gentry already has the original signature records. But that's not your biggest problem today. Your biggest problem is that Simone has been talking to someone. I'd check her phone if I were you. That one was a fabrication. But I did not need it to be true. I needed it to feel possible. Because Marcus was already afraid, and fear does not reason carefully. Fear looks for somewhere to put itself, and the nearest available target is always the person standing next to you. Walt was watching the laptop feed from the truck at the end of the driveway. At 7 that evening, he texted me one word. Going. I drove up and parked on the gravel shoulder 50 yards from the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see movement, shapes, and shadows. Voices I could not yet hear. I put on the small earpiece connected to the transmitter behind the photograph. Their voices came through clearly. Marcus was saying, "Give me the phone, right now. Give it to me." Simone said, "Get away from me. I don't know what you're talking about. Who have you been calling? Who knows about Paul Gentry? Nobody. Marcus, I swear to you, nobody. Then, how does someone know his name? How does someone know about the phone call you made?" I didn't tell anyone. There was the sound of something heavy being set down hard on a surface. Then Marcus said, his voice dropping to something colder, "We should have been more careful about the old man from the beginning. If Harold figures out what the footage actually shows..." I pressed the transmit button. "I already know what the footage shows," I said. My voice came from directly behind the photograph on their living room wall. "Hello, Marcus," Simone screamed. There was a crash, something knocked from a table, and then silence. I let the silence sit for 5 full seconds. "I have been watching this house for 3 years, I said. "Everything on that drive has already been copied and is sitting in 3 separate locations. Paul Gentry has the financial records. The DA's office has a sealed envelope waiting for my call. But before I make that call, I want you to do one thing for me." Another silence. "I want you to tell me what happened on that trail. I want to hear you say it. Not for me. For Danny." I heard Simone start to cry, a high broken sound, and then I heard Marcus say something I will never forget for as long as I live. Something no lawyer would ever be able to walk back. Something said in a room with 3 recording devices running simultaneously, and Walt watching every second from a laptop screen at the end of the driveway. He said, "It was an accident waiting to happen. We just gave it a nudge." I sat in my truck on that mountain road for a moment and closed my eyes. Then I opened them and reached for my phone and called Detective Karen Hollis of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office, who Walt had arranged a meeting with 2 days earlier and who was currently sitting in an unmarked sedan at the base of the driveway with 2 uniformed deputies waiting for my signal. I said, "Karen, come up now." The sound of the cruisers coming up the gravel road must have reached them through the walls because there was a sudden eruption of movement on the feed, Marcus shouting, the back door slamming, and then one of the deputies calmly stepping out from behind the corner of the house, where he had been positioned for the last 40 minutes. Marcus came to a stop 10 feet from him with his hands out like a man who had just run into a wall he did not see coming. Simone walked out the front door with her hands raised. She was still crying. I got out of my truck and walked up the driveway slowly. Detective Hollis met my eyes and gave me a nod that said everything I needed it to say. Marcus was in handcuffs. His face was the color of old ash. When he saw me, he started talking fast, started saying something about a misunderstanding, about how the footage could be interpreted different ways, about his attorney. I looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then I looked away, and I did not look at him again. Simone was sitting on the front steps with a deputy beside her. She looked up at me as I passed. "I'm sorry," she said. "Harold, I'm so sorry." I did not answer her. I kept walking. I walked out to the dock and stood at the end of it with my hands in my jacket pockets and looked out at Lake Lure in the early dark. The water was black and still. Somewhere across the lake, a light was on in someone else's house, warm and ordinary. I thought about Danny standing on this dock as a boy, maybe 11 years old, casting a line out into this same water with his whole future still ahead of him, laughing at something I had said. I thought about how I had built this house for him with my own hands because I had wanted him to have something I had made. I thought about how he had loved it here. I stayed there until the sheriff's vehicles had gone and Walt came and stood beside me without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. 8 months later, I was in the Rutherford County Courthouse on a Monday in July when the jury came back. The room was quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when something final is about to happen. Danny's college roommate was there, his cousin from Greensboro. Paul Gentry sat 3 rows behind me. Walt was next to me, with his hand on my shoulder. The judge read the verdict for Marcus Webb first. Premeditated murder in the first degree, tampering with safety equipment resulting in death, fraud, and forgery. She sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He did not buckle the way they sometimes do in movies. He just went very still, like something had been switched off inside him. For Simone Carver, the jury found conspiracy to commit murder and accessory, 22 years in state prison. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the way the air feels after a long storm clears. Not warm yet, not settled, but cleaner. Like something that had been wrong for a long time had finally been set back in its right position. 6 weeks after the sentencing, I drove to the state correctional facility where Marcus was being held. I sat across from him behind the partition and looked at him in his uniform for a long moment without speaking. He would not meet my eyes at first. Then he did. I reached into my jacket pocket and set something flat on the counter in front of the glass. It was a photograph of Danny at about age 10, standing on that dock with a fishing rod, squinting into the sun, grinning that particular grin of his. I looked at Marcus until he looked at the photograph. Then I stood up and walked out without a word. I did not go back. 4 months after the trial, on a Saturday in November, I drove up to Lake Lure for the last time as the owner of that property. Except it was not the last time the way I had once imagined it would be. When I turned onto the gravel road and saw the house through the pines, it looked different. The driveway had a new low sign at the entrance, hand-painted on cedar board, the lettering clean and careful. Daniel Mitchell House, Veterans Transition Retreat. I had spent those 4 months working with a local nonprofit that provided transitional housing and mental health support to post-service veterans. The lake house was the right size, the right location, the right kind of quiet. We had converted the 2 guest rooms into private sleeping quarters. The study became a counseling space. The dock became a place where men and women who had carried heavy things for a long time could sit in the early morning and watch the water and not have to explain themselves to anyone. On opening weekend, 11 veterans moved in for a 3-week residential program. I stood in the front yard that first evening and watched the lights come on in every room of that house, warm and steady. And for the first time in 3 years, it did not hurt to see it. A man named Earl, a retired Marine in his late 50s with a quiet manner and careful eyes, came and stood beside me at the edge of the yard. He had barely spoken since his arrival. He looked at the lake and then he looked at me. "Your son built this place?" he asked. "I built it for him," I said. He nodded slowly. Then after a long moment he said, "Good place." That was all. But it was enough. I drove home to Charlotte that Sunday evening as the sun was setting behind the mountains and the interstate was long and empty ahead of me. I thought about everything I should have seen and did not see. I thought about the small signs I had explained away, the inconsistencies in the story of that morning on the trail, the way certain things had never quite added up when I let myself think about them. in the still of 3 in the morning. I had loved my son, and I had trusted the people around him because he had trusted them. That was the most painful lesson of all, and I am still learning it. But here is what I have come to believe. There are people who move through the world looking for what they can take from it, from the people in it who work and build and love with honest hands. And sometimes those people win for a while. Sometimes the damage they do is real and permanent and cannot be undone. You cannot bring back what is gone. I know that now, in a way, I did not before, and will carry for the rest of my life. But here is the other thing I know. The truth has a patience that evil does not. It waits. It holds its evidence carefully in the dark. And when the time is right, it steps into the light, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly and completely. The way dawn comes up over Lake Lure on a November morning, slow and cold, and absolutely certain. My name is Harold Mitchell. I am 63 years old. I am a father. And my son's house is full of people who needed it. That is Danny's legacy. Not what was taken from him. What was made from what remained. If this story moved you, please leave a comment and tell me your name and where you are listening from tonight. Hit subscribe so you never miss another story. And if you know someone carrying a grief like mine, share this with them. They are not alone. Neither are you.